Morning. Thank you, Gary and Pam and Jeremy and Brant for putting this together. It's exciting to be here and to be able to chat about all this stuff. I am going to pull up my presentation. I've only been using computers for about 35 years. Let's see if I can do this. Where's the play button? Nope. That one? There we go. Great. Okay, can I use arrows? Boop, boop. Super. Okay. So when I was chatting with Gary earlier this summer about this conference and thinking about things this year, and I was regaling him with war stories from some of the work that we did in the R&D lab at the New York Times over the past handful of years, and he was very patiently listening to me go on and on, drone on and on, if you will. And that's a dad joke for Pam. And it was helpful for me as well, because so I left the Times about 6 months ago to join Knight Foundation, and I had put a lot of the thinking about 5G and things like that kind of on the back burner. And it was interesting to have these conversations and understand how he was thinking about putting this conference together and all of the different things that you'll hear about over the next today and tomorrow, in terms of looking ahead and all of the different things that ways that this will touch journalism and mobile journalism over the next couple of years. So and then I didn't respond to a bunch of emails. So he titled the talk for me of why 5G and why now. So I'm going to try to do justice to that. Really by looking backward into some of the work that we did at the New York Times to answer the question of why 5G, why did we focus on 5G? It's kind of an interesting, oddly shaped area of emerging technology. And then also sort of talk a little bit about why now in terms of how Knight's thinking about it as a look ahead, and I think some of the connection points to the conference this year. So why 5G? As for us, for the past handful of years, for the Times I should say, I'm still using the wrong labels there, it has been a placeholder for advancements in mobile journalism writ large. It was kind of a way to be able to look at things. But obviously, focus on mobile journalism goes back before the conception of and the rollout of a technology like 5G. And I'm curious about, there have been a lot of times where we've talked about this being the year of mobile. Does anybody have a gut feel of when they feel like, what was the year of mobile? 2012. Dan?
I was going to say 2015.
2015. Some people said 2010 was the year of mobile. And then they said 2011 was the year of mobile. And then, I guess we went through that, the doldrums there. Came back up for air in 2014, 2016, 2017. And you know how we knew it was the year of mobile? When we stopped seeing headlines like this, right? Because we were actually living it. And and there's been a lot of progress along the way. But part of what we, this is a cheeky slide, but part of what we more seriously took away from this when we're thinking about something like 5G is that a lot of these things don't happen all at once. There isn't this one, black and white to color television moment where we can have that clear before and after when it comes to areas of emerging technology. And 5G is I think particularly complex because it's not really just one thing. Underneath the hood, it's a lot of things. And so if you have been alive for the past couple of years, you've probably been inundated with 5G commercials from the carriers, and so much of the messaging, the consumer messaging is about speed, right? More speed, right? So if you're a happy Chad just living your life as a consumer, it's really about just having a faster connection on your phone that they want you to go out and buy a new one of. But underneath the hood, you're the hipster, and it's really this whole set of new standards and technologies that are all being rolled out. Some of them are hardware based, some of them are software based, and the whole rollout of all of the things under the 5G umbrella is probably about a decade long in terms of a project and an execution. And so in the simple way, it can mean one thing, but really what is happening here in terms of smarter connections between cells to be able to better keep you connected, in terms of being able to route different people's traffic differently, so that if you're a journalist at a stadium, what's the capacity of this thing over here? Like 100,000? 85,000, right? So if you're actually trying to cover the game, you can actually have kind of like an HOV lane from your phone to the production center instead of be battling everybody who's posting to Instagram and things like that. So there are a ton of capabilities under the hood, and we got really interested in trying to understand how that would play out for journalism and for journalists. So part of our motivation for exploring this was giant bags of money. In running an R&D, setting up R&D, even at a place like the New York Times, you don't just get a big blank check to work with. You have to basically fight for your existence. And so what we did, and the Post did something similar around the same time, is develop a commercial partnership model where we found ways of working with large tech companies who also had large marketing budgets and a desire to have ways of being able to explain what this technology was and how it would be useful and things like that as well. And so the idea that we could work with a Verizon and the Post could work with an AT&T on this to fund a lot of that work made it worth our time to try to really understand how to get our heads around 5G. And one of the reasons that they were interested and we were interested is that ahead of the adoption of these technologies, there are a lot of situations where the way people want to talk about the use cases for an area of emerging technology are basically generally wrong. So going back a couple of years before the rollout of 5G, what you would see, everybody would talk about how you're going to be able to download a movie in a couple of seconds, right? And they were trying to take a thing that you maybe understood as being a crappy experience on 3G or 4G, even though you can stream Netflix and things like that on 4G pretty decently, and try to hype it up. But I don't know anybody who actually does this. This isn't a common use case. It's just that in absence of people actually having their hands on the technology and grasping at reasons why you should go out and buy a new phone and a new plan and we should go and do this massive rollout, these are the kind of garbage use cases that pop up. And I could pick on other sites, lazy sites, putting this stuff out there. The bottom screen grab is from the New York Times from 2016. So we're as guilty as everybody else on this front. And so part of the motivation for focusing on 5G from a journalism perspective was really trying to understand what those use cases were. And there are two ways to think about it from a journalism perspective. One is journalists themselves, and particularly with a lot of areas of emerging technology, and I think particularly when it comes to things that aid connectivity, are extreme users, right? The needs of a journalist are out ahead of the needs of a person who has a job that sends them all around the country and things like that. And so they're kind of leading indicators for what, I think what we have as a kind of side effect of the pandemic scene and the rise of hybrid and remote work and things like that. Journalists have been doing that for decades. And so finding ways to build solutions for ourselves as journalists was one big area of interest, but also for us to try to get out ahead of understanding what does it mean when most people have 5G phones and most people have 5G plans. How do expectations change and things like that as well. And so one of the things that we did, we looked back to the rollout from 3G to 4G, which happened about a decade ago now. And I think if you remember back to that point, 3G was fine for some things. You currently stream very easily. There was a lot of downloads and things like that. And as people started to get 4G phones and 4G coverage, that was really the thing that unlocked a lot of what I think of as the mobile web, as Web 2.0 and things like that. One of the examples that we would go back to often was Uber and ride sharing as a phenomenon that a combination of things all came together. Device capabilities, better connectivity, and cloud computing to create entire new industries like ride sharing that I think when the people building the 4G specifications were doing that work, they weren't necessarily saying, what'll be great about 4G? I'll be able to get a Hyundai to pick me up on the corner in 7 minutes. And it really required the full sort of rollout and adoption of 4G in order for those things to be able to be created. And so if you look at a lot of the things that have happened over the past 8, 9, 10 years in the industry and things that are continuing to evolve today, if you look at added device capabilities, particularly with smartphones, better cameras, better processing, and what that enables on the device. If you look at the advancements on the cloud computing side of things and then the bridge between the two of greater connectivity, you can think about the rise of TikTok and the idea that it has an ability from a real-time personalization perspective to know exactly what to give you next because you're able to watch this stuff, you're able to consume it in real time, and the profile of you in the cloud is able to figure out what you're looking at next. A lot of these advancements really boil down to these three buckets. What that let us feel confident about is that when we're thinking about 5G, there isn't like you don't install 5G into an application or add a 5G mode or something like that. It's really thinking about the role of 5G and all of these other opportunities around better visual storytelling and things like that that create a lot of the opportunities. And so when we were putting all this together, we came up with a list of literally 100 different things that we could do. And what that gave us confidence to do in coming up with this container for innovation to be able to try a bunch of stuff out was, without knowing exactly what we were going to do because 5G didn't exist yet and we didn't have our hands on it, we felt like there were so many opportunities that we could commit to doing something, and that commitment we felt firm enough about to throw our CEO on stage and basically make that commitment this was at the Consumer Electronics Show a couple of years back, 2019, and made him say all of these things that he didn't really have a full, complete grasp of because we didn't either. But we felt like there was so much opportunity space that we could pull something off here. And so Nico is coming up, I think, next from the Times. My former colleague is going to show the cool stuff. I'm not going to tread on what he has to show that are the fruits of the labor of this 5G lab and things like that we set up. But just to make this a little bit abstract, I'm going to quickly walk through one example. So this is Josh Hainer, Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer. He is also a programmer, too. He's pretty technical. Back in 2012, he built the contents of the backpack, which contains basically a remote transmission device. It's a Linux box and a bunch of modems, and he hooks up his camera to a tether, and basically from anywhere he can upload photos, sidelines of the Super Bowl, political conventions, things like that. Homegrown, we had maybe 3 of them. The computer would get hot. People would throw ice packs into the back of it to keep it going, and it's hard to get around and things like that. And so one of the opportunities that we saw was taking that backpack and getting it down through, this all looks like so much innovation happening here, right? You see all the Post-it notes and things like that. Getting it down to just be software on a phone that a freelancer could download on their way to an assignment and be able to use by tethering to their camera or just taking the SD card. And what this allows for, and this is something that the Times has been using for a couple of years now, is a photographer in the field can automatically upload their photos while they're taking them. There's some downsampling that happens on the phone to get JPEGs of raw images up faster and things like that. But the idea is that the selection process and cropping and toning and things like that generally would have likely happened in the field before can happen somewhere else. That could be back in the main newsroom in New York. That could be somebody else working from home. But it kind of starts to separate out the roles a little bit and makes it possible to get material out to the public that much faster. And so it's that kind of work that we did that helped us not just adopt 5G, but then start thinking about all of the consequences, the second and third order consequences around that. Because now what you're starting to do is you're starting to change workflows and building new opportunities for coverage and things like that. And so fast forward to trying this out on the red carpet at the Oscars in 2020, where Josh took something like 6,000 photos. Every photo, the average time back to New York was 1.5 seconds. And so, and the way the red carpet works, we're generally about 10 minutes ahead of television. And so if there's some iconic photo of somebody on the red carpet, like Brad Pitt, we can have it out before anybody else. And so that's not just television, that's anybody else on the web who's waiting for that to come over the wires and so on. And I think as we all know from the way social media works now, there's a significant first mover advantage in these kind of live situations to being able to do that. And so this was filing directly from the red carpet. The alternative, the fallback is you take the card out, you have a runner who has to be wearing a tux, and they run around the corner to the media center and hand it off to somebody else who then uploads it. So this was quite the game changer in terms of being able to actually have this be live coverage. So for us, the Wi-5G really boils down to thinking about how it has this role at the center of this kind of 3-ingredient salad. So why now? Why should we be paying attention to this? Are you familiar with the Gartner hype cycle? Right, every emerging technology, according to Gartner, and they charge a lot of money for this, so they must be right. You know, we get really excited about things. There's this peak of inflated expectations, and then the future doesn't arrive yet, or it arrives and it's actually dystopian, whatever it may be, killer robots. So we go through this trough of disillusionment, and then finally we figure out what to do with this new technology, and then we kind of just becomes part of our lives for better or worse. So this is a really boring slide, but the point of it is, writ large, if you think about 5G as one thing, it's kind of going down the slope. You know, it's been around for a couple of years now. Maybe you went out and bought a phone in the past couple of years. Maybe it has a 5G plan. Maybe it doesn't. But there's more that needs to happen that is completely outside of our control. Really exciting stuff like spectrum auctions and backhaul and all kinds of stuff. So, you know, it's still, writ large, it still has time. But one of the things I'm excited about for right now, I guess the other thing is, when I landed yesterday, I have an AT&T, which is the blue carrier in the bottom left. They don't have, I can't pick up a 5G signal here. I don't know if anybody can. But Verizon, the red company in the bottom right, says that they have their like crappy 5G in place here, and then T-Mobile pink has better 5G. I think what we experience now, and this, you know, this has been true forever, that the difference between the ideal of these coverage maps and the reality of being like inside a building or on the wrong side of a concrete wall or something like that means that it's still, these technologies are still very spotty when it comes to knowing that you can rely on this kind of stuff. But it's not, again, going back to the hipster and not the Chad, it's not one monolithic thing. It's a bunch of different things. And so what I wanted to do here was take, this is just a total kind of back of the napkin way of thinking about the next couple of days here. But, you know, we have such a great slate of speakers talking about a bunch of areas that are adjacent to 5G in some way, shape, or form. And so you can kind of think about some of the stuff that we're gonna hear about over the next couple of days is actually, in my opinion, is actually pretty far along in terms of its path through the hype cycle, and some other stuff is still pretty early on. So I think some of the talk around on-demand listening and curation, right? So I think Ariane's doing that tomorrow. Julia is doing a session this afternoon. You know, that stuff for me is pretty far along. Like that's stuff we can experience today. Some of the field production work that Nico's going to talk about, similarly, like if 5G is available somewhere, you can use it. The Times uses it in a bunch of places, other publishers as well. Ray, I was feeling like gamification and things like that. Like a lot of that's here today. 5G, you know, might be like a just add salt kind of thing, but there's not that much that's dependent on further rollout of 5G for that. The citizen journalism angle, I think, from a, you know, particularly from an ethics perspective, journalists have 5G phones in a breaking news situation. So do most people, and they're putting that material out onto social media, whether they are thinking about it as committing an act of journalism, or they're not thinking about it that way, or they have a good motive or a bad motive. Who knows? It's just that when something happens, we're more likely to be awash in many different viewpoints, literal visual perspectives of something happening. And that really changes the role of news organizations in trying to understand what to do with that and how. I think a lot of the real-time personalization and programming things, similarly, there's more opportunity for the 5G rollout to aid in terms of like real-time video and stuff like that, but I think a lot of that's in place. Same with positioning and geo. When you get into some of the more new visual forms of creation, so 3D scene creation, AR, and MR. So Nico, Robert Hernandez from USC is going to be talking about that later today. that's the kind of stuff where, again, from a journalism perspective, where I sit, I think there's a lot of great opportunity now to be able to actually pull off this kind of storytelling. I think there's more to figure out in terms of when and how to use it, how to make it easier to use, how to make it less time consuming to use, and things like that. But that's refinement. That's, I think there's a little bit less from an invention perspective there, waiting around for some new technology, aspect of the technology to arrive. I'm curious to hear, like, I think Matt Waite's presentation on drones tomorrow, he's kind of titled it like, this is a cool thing, and it's been kind of silent for a while. So, that feels trophy to me. Same with voice. Who uses a smart speaker or a voice device regularly? Like, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumb sideways, down, down, down. Yeah, you up. I think like the weather, music, timers, things like that. There's some set use cases, but if I get a, by the way, did you know about this thing that you don't want to know about one more time? I'm gonna unplug it. And then, I think some of the stuff around VR, metaverse, synthetic media. Are we doing the lunch session on AI? Dan? Yes. So a lot of things to unpack there, but I think one of them about the sort of like the creation of avatars and a lot of this generative visual stuff that we've seen over the past couple of months and things like that. And I think a big use case for journalism is being able to use that for good, to create art and things like that for articles and so on. So curious about that. So long story short, one of the things I'm really excited about with the composition of sessions is that one way to think about it is we've got stuff that is very actionable today. We've got stuff that's going to take some more time to fully bake, and for us, I think as an industry to really grapple with. And I hope that folks find that combination of things that are practical and thought-provoking over the next couple of days. So that is me. We have a few minutes for questions.
Yes,
or
exactly. If anybody has any questions, please come to the microphone. Any questions? Any check-in? Ideas? So, Mark, what do you think then the telecoms are thinking about in terms of any partnerships with news organizations, advertising organizations, like that? Are they thinking about going it alone? Are they partnering?
So we had a partnership, the New York Times, not Knight or me, with Verizon for 3 years. And it was really at that early stage of trying to get those use cases, right? Of, oh, you can do this thing from the red carpet of the Oscars and that kind of stuff. And the Post had one with AT&T. A feeling I have is that from a consumer marketing perspective, that is about getting people to buy new phones and new plans. And that part, as they see it, of the 5G rollout is largely done. And so that being the consumer side, the continued opportunity from a true partnership perspective, I think is on the B2B side of being able to show, particularly with some of these new types of devices, drones and things like that, where the applications are for journalism, right? So Verizon, a few years back, bought a drone company, Skyward, and has pulled that in to their B2B offering. And they do that for like first responder kind of stuff. And so, if you think about who shows up in the aftermath of a hurricane, it's journalists, or during a hurricane, it's like journalists and like insurance claims adjusters. And so figuring out how these examples from journalism can be applicable to other industries from a B2B perspective, I think there's more potential there. But I would wager we're in a little bit of this gap right now where getting some of these new types of devices, headsets and things like that actually out to market, and starting to see where and how and when people use those, particularly if there is adoption outside of the home, is probably going to fuel another wave of that kind of collaboration. And that might be with the carriers, it might be with other companies. The Times did a partnership with the company formerly known as Facebook around mixed reality stuff that was kind of using the smartphone era as a test bed for the headset era.
Mark, outside of the major metropolitan areas, the 5G rollout has been a little different, as you showed with your maps. How, in terms of how far off should journalists who are not working in these major metropolitan downtown areas be thinking that the 5G impacts will affect them when you're looking at this sort of trough of disillusionment and eventually slope of enlightenment? Are we talking 2 years? Are we talking 5 years? Does it depend on where you are?
My feeling, so there are two things about it. Like one, 4G is not over, and 4G has continued to get better while the 5G rollout has been happening. Some of that's new hardware installations for 4G, some of that's software upgrades and things like that. So if you happen to be in a place with no 5G but good 4G, you are probably capable of doing most of these things just from a like remote tethering perspective and things like that today. So, you know, I think some of how we tried to play it both ways at the Times was we talk about this like very, very loose definition of broad G as this substitute for essentially connectivity, with the idea that the improvements in connectivity are inevitable, and understanding where and how to use them to our advantage is a worthwhile today thing. I think in the vast majority of places, I would fall short there when it comes to truly rural locations. But I think all, you know, again, when you go back to this really, you know, monster boring slide here, when you think about Starlink and other like low Earth orbit satellite uplink connections and things like that, a variety of technologies coming together make it more possible to be able to do that kind of work from the field. And so my hope is that in the next 2 years, we're in a position where it is more likely to be the exception that you can't do something than it is the expectation that you can't do something.
Hey, Mark. So in a lot of these kind of graphs and even the coverage, it's all about the devices, how many devices are sold. Oh, you know, where is 5G available? But how much do you think accessibility of the tools to build this kind of content and use it in a normal way, kind of like in the way that, you know, short form video didn't really take off until TikTok basically took over. But video was around, you know, there was Vine before that, and the tools just got better. What role do you see that in this hype cycle?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, right? I mean, I think that's to use the AI example. You know, I think part of what we're seeing right now is not just these like 2-column scientific papers describing some state-of-the-art approach to doing some sort of scene generation or something like that, but like you can go on to the Mid-Journey Discord and just like start typing away and have it just throw off AI-generated art and things like that. And so I think it is, to your point, the breadth of accessibility for creator tools for a lot of people, if not everybody, is a bit of the rocket ship that it creates this moment where journalism and journalists should be paying attention to where and how and when to use this for journalism, right? I think it's less likely that tools that are built with only journalism in mind move fast enough, tend to scale, or stay, you know, the companies behind those have, you know, it's a challenge to remain solvent and things like that as well. So I think to your point, figuring out when and how to take advantage of those things that are much broader mass media opportunities and be opportunistic about it is great.
This is super enlightening and thought-provoking. Thank you, Mark. One question, you know, each time there's a big technological leap in communications technology, I think a lot of folks feel, especially in our industry, feel that it sort of slowly chips away at the gatekeeper status of legacy media. Because as you say, like everyone kind of has access to 5G. Do you feel like 5G on the net will be a force multiplier for journalists or more of a disruptive threat?
Yes. The force multiplier. So journalism operates with all these rules of engagement that are really good for, say, democracy, but add time and complexity to having that material be present and in front of people. And so, I think part of what this requires news organizations to do is to think ahead as well, right? So we were talking about this at some point yesterday, right? Where you're in an A1 meeting and they'll say, okay, the Supreme Court decision is going to happen on one of these 3 days, and it's going to be one of these 3 outcomes, and we have the whole plan. We know exactly what's going to happen. We feel like we can't say it that way for a whole bunch of reasons. And so whether or not it actually changes how and advances how news organizations put those place markers down, right? And that's some of the work that you've done and have thought about. I think even knowing how to be poised to move as quickly as possible within those standards and those ethics, and staying out ahead. That's a big piece of it, right? And that's not the technology itself aiding that necessarily. I think it requires that change in the way that news organizations work. But another piece of it is taking advantage of the opportunity of the idea that if something happens, it is likely captured somewhere, and finding much better and faster ways to be able to ethically and responsibly use that material as well, right? And that creates, when you're working that quickly as well, that creates a whole, puts pressure on a whole set of scenarios and conditions to make sure you're getting it right, that you're not putting the person who created that material in harm's way if they weren't thinking about the idea that would then be on CNN or something like that as well. So I think that's part of it, right? That it does create more of this kind of curator, endorser signal from news organizations than just creator.